Hi guys, welcome to Bible Breakdown. We're doing Psalms chapter 58. This psalm is titled, A Cry Against Injustice, for the choir director, Do Not Destroy, a Miktam of David. So before I start this, I feel like it's a little late to say this, but you should read 1st and 2nd Samuel before you read Psalm. And I feel like there's a lot of Psalms that correlate to the stories in 1st and 2nd Samuel, mostly because David is the main writer of this book, and David was the main character in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And like this psalm, it has some background from like issues that happened in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Mostly, I think it's like talking about when Saul was like after David. That's like the biggest theme of 1st and 2nd Samuel. So that's like the lightest summary I can give you on those books is David was called to be king, but Saul was in power, and Saul didn't like that David was getting all this recognition, so Saul was out to get David and made people like turn against David. But David also had his little group that stood beside him and God, and here we are. And I say all that to say because that theme goes along with this chapter. For verses 1 and 2, I wrote that David's bringing up the problem of people in power not being true and righteous, but bringing corruption that leads to violence and harm. David's basically talking how they're being very unfair. And in verse 2, it says, No, you practice injustice in your hearts. With your hands, you weigh out violence in the land. Then, just to continue, in verses 3 to 5, I wrote that it points out how the ones of the wicked ignore the voice of God on purpose and they choose to live in sin. In verses 4 and 5, David uses a lot of imagery, and it says, They have venom like the venom of a snake, like the death cobra that stops up its ear, that does not listen to the sound of the charmers who skillfully weaves spells. That point that he makes in verse 4 when he says stops up their ears, that's basically comparing them to not listening to the voice of God. And in result to that, David, he requests for verses 6 to 9, he requests the most harsh and immediate justice over these people. David is asking God to put an immediate stop to like all this violence and all this corruption that's going on. He's saying things like knock their teeth out. He's saying may they not see the sun and sweep them away. He just wants this to happen quickly. And there's a reason behind this like massive request. The reason is in verse 10 and 11, and I wrote that David requests all these things to happen in hopes that they see God's judgment and acknowledge his authority. So this is all a plan to let the people around him see this as a warning. Like God does not play any games. If he sees you acting out of his will, out of his voice, this is the repercussions. So he's kind of using the wicked as an example for other non-believers, but also using the wicked as like reassurance for the believers that God will give the people what they deserve. Even in verse 11, it says, Then people will say, Yes, there is reward for the righteous. There is a God who judges on earth. So I just feel like this is a reminder that God will serve justice where justice needs to be served. And that is all I have for you guys. I will see you guys tomorrow for chapter 59. I love y'all. God loves y'all more. Have a great night.